A while back we did a study on the coming of the kingdom, and this will kind of go along with that, but it's starting at the beginning. We kind of jumped into the study of the coming of the kingdom with Christ coming to judge the world, and I thought it'd be good for us to look at the overall picture that the Bible presents as far as the reign of the King of the earth. And we know in the very beginning God created the earth. And because He created the earth, it makes Him the owner of the earth. It's why the Psalms say that He owns the cattle upon 1,000 hills. He not only created the earth, He created all the creatures. So He's the owner. And when God created the earth, He set up a ruler over the earth. And by the way, this is the pattern that we expect He'll follow with the creation of the new heavens and the new earth. As we read in that one parable, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little or over much. I forget how it goes. And so I will make thee ruler over 10 cities or over 5 cities. And we have expectation that when God creates again another world, another new creation, as He has probably been doing ever since He's been God from all eternity, that He will set His people as rulers over these creations. And one big evidence for God doing that is because He did it with this world. If we go back to Genesis chapter 1, in Genesis 1, starting in verse 24, it says, "And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." God created Adam and Eve, and then He gave them dominion over the earth, over all creatures, and over the earth itself, over this world. Mankind, in the form of Adam and his wife, mankind ruled the earth as king for a short while, for a little while, because man, we don't know how long, but he was obedient for a time after his creation. Few days, few weeks, couple months. We don't know exactly how long it was. Maybe it was only a few hours. I don't know if the Bible even gives any kind of indicator. But for however long Adam and Eve were faithful to the commandment of God, and at that time the law of God was confined to that tree. You can eat of the fruit of every tree in all the garden, in all the world, but the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat of it. In the day you eat thereof, ye will surely die. And that was the only law, the only law in the world. And of course, that's the point where Satan attacked, and we read Well, actually, before we get into Satan, wanted to take a look at the word dominion a little bit that was used here in Genesis 1:26, that where God says that man would have dominion over the earth. It's found in Numbers 24. Numbers 24, starting in verse 17. It says, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab and destroy all the children of Sheth. And this star is referring to the Messiah, the Lord Jesus Christ. And then in verse 19, out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city. And so Christ will have dominion. And that's the same word that's used of man having dominion over the earth. It's also found, the same word, in 1 Kings chapter 4. 1 Kings 4, starting in verse 22. And Solomon's provision for one day was 30 measures of fine flour, and 60 measures of meal, 10 fat oxen, and 20 oxen out of the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides harts and roebucks and fallow deer and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region on this side the river, from Tiphsah even to Azza, over all the kings on this side the river, and he had peace on all sides round about him. Solomon had dominion over everything on that side of the river. And of course, he was king. And when you're king, you have dominion. You rule. You have authority. And the word dominion, the Hebrew word, 7287 in Strong's, is translated as rule 13 times, dominion 9 times, as reign 1 time, and ruler 1 time, and it's also translated as take and prevaileth. But that gives the idea that it has to do with ruling over an area. Solomon ruled over everything on one side of the river. Man ruled over the earth, the whole earth, without exception, prior to his fall. But then came Satan, and now we can go to Genesis 3. Genesis 3, and from verse 1, it says, Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which Jehovah God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. And that was the worst day, maybe, in human history. That was the awful time when Adam and Eve, and Adam was our figurehead, and so all of us, all people who were in the loins of Adam, we were there in him because we've all descended from him. That was the day when everything bad that could happen happened. There was rebellion against God. Because of rebellion, there was the consequence of transgressing the law, which was death in soul. and that very day Adam died in his soul existence. There was corruption of the physical body, and the effects of sin began at that point, and he would slowly start to die in his body just like all of us. As we have been born into the world, and since our birth, we're moving towards that day of death. And Adam did die physically at the age of 930, but that was the day that the creation became cursed. It was a beautiful, perfect creation, and after that, there were thorns and thistles, and animals started devouring one another, and it was awful, terrible, the worst day imaginable. And on top of that, that was the day that the king of the earth was put down. He lost his rule over the thing that God had given to him, and he only ruled a short time. And sometimes in the Bible, kings only rule for short periods of time. Like there's the last 4 kings of Judah. A couple of them only ruled like 3 months and 10 days. And then they lose their reign and they cease to rule. And that's how it was with Adam, with man. He ruled the earth as supreme ruler, and then another began to rule. Satan began to rule when Adam obeyed the lie and disobeyed the truth, when he disobeyed the commandment of God. We can know this from many verses, but let's start with Romans chapter 6. Romans 6, which tells us from verse 14 through 16, "For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you're not under the law but under grace." Notice the word dominion. Romans 6:14. The word dominion. Sin shall not have dominion over you. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law but under grace? God forbid. Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are, to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. And Adam did not obey God concerning the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If he had obeyed God, he would be a servant of God, a servant of righteousness, and he would have continued to live indefinitely, eternally, as long as he was obedient. But he disobeyed God, yet in disobeying God, he obeyed another. He obeyed Satan, and even though it was a lie, he believed the lie and obeyed the lie, and therefore became servant to the one who gave the lie, who spoke the lie, and to sin itself. And from that point on, there's no way that man could rule the earth, because Satan ruled man. And if you have great possessions and you have great authority and power and rule, and then someone conquers you and puts you into doing service for them, like the Jews in Israel, well, who is their ruler? And who is the ruler over everything that they previously possessed? The one who has conquered you. And it was through the right of conquest that Satan took over what man possessed. And what man possessed was the God-given right to rule the earth. And this is why, if we go to the New Testament, we'll see several statements like this. In John 12, verse 31, it says, "Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. He's the prince of this world, and that's Satan. He's called prince, and by the way, the Greek word translated as prince is translated as prince 11 times, but 22 times it's translated as ruler. It literally means, or it's literally saying, now shall the ruler of this world be cast out, which is really the equivalent word of that word back in Genesis, dominion or rule or ruler. You'll have dominion or rule over the earth. Satan got man to believe his lie, giving him authority and power over the man, and as a result, he becomes the ruler. Or go to John 16, verse 11, of judgment, because the prince of this world is judge. And that's the same word that we saw in the other verse in John. Or in Ephesians chapter 2, Ephesians 2, verses 1 and 2, and you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins, wherein in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. And of course that's the devil, Satan, who is called the prince or the ruler of the power of the air. We could go back to the Old Testament, to Isaiah 14, and here God sets up the king of Babylon as a type and figure of Satan. In verse 4, it's a proverb against the king of Babylon. And then speaking of him, but spiritually of Satan, it says in verse 5, Jehovah has broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth. Now Isaiah 14 is actually getting into the putting down or the deposing of Satan in the day of judgment, and that's why it's really describing his defeat at the hands of the Lord Jesus in the day of judgment. For example, further down, we read in verse 13, for thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. And what does that sound like? 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the man of sin takes his seat in the temple. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High. 2 Thessalonians 2, showing himself that he is God. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? So the emphasis here is that Satan was king, but has lost rule as king over the earth, and it's letting us know the time that takes place is in the day of judgment.